Welcome to our event today on behalf of the USC Center for Mindfulness Science. Welcome to the Camilleri Hall at the Brain and Creativity Institute. We like to have our events here when we can. And today, really happy to be joined by my old friend, Joe. As you'll hear a little bit in our dialogue to come, we've known each other as long as we've been in medicine. We met on the first day of medical school back in September '99. And a long and winding path, kind of alongside and sometimes closer, sometimes farther, geolocation-wise, but a really soulful connection I've had with Joe. And Joe's out with his new book, Medicine Song, Spiritual Healing and the Psychedelic Renaissance. So today is really an opportunity to go into the details on this book that Joe has just written and the theme that he's written about. And so it will be kind of structured as a bit of a dialogue, but also a group-a-log, like open for questions from all of you, and also all of you who are joining us online. I'll be keeping my eye when the time comes where questions are coming in to check there too. Joe did his undergraduate degree at UCLA here in Los Angeles. And after coming out from Arizona, in his newest book, even more personal stories from his childhood in Arizona there. And before starting medical school at UC San Diego, which is where we met, had a few other activities working with AIDS care in San Diego, exploring some traditional Chinese medicine education. And so when we met in September of '99, first week of orientation at med school, I recognized that, I had like a brethren within this medical education process that I was about to start, where I came in as a bit of a skeptic about the wisdom of modern medicine approaches and techniques, and a very strong desire to bring more integrative and holistic approaches into medicine. And there weren't a lot of other medical students who started out with that as an interest, but Joe was one. And as time went on, there's some stories in the book, both this book and his last book, about some of our adventures together going through medical school. But Joe really became deeply interested in a way that was beyond intellectual interest, but really a heart's desire to explore spiritual healing through indigenous practices, and put in the time and energy and work to learn those practices in the Shipibo tradition down in Peru after finishing residency and doing some postdoctoral research at UCSD again. And he wrote a lot about some of his early experiences with these kinds of approaches in his first book, Fellowship of the River, 2017. And this more recent book comes after many years of being a practitioner of these arts. And as he writes about in this most recent book, not just the Shipibo ayahuasquero tradition, but also the integration of psychedelic therapy into what's possible to do legally as a physician in modern America today, especially with ketamine, where we have a legal psychedelic that is possible to use. And while his work has kept him out of academia for the most part, he has kept a pulse on what's happening academically, as you can tell if you read his books, and we'll talk about some of that today. We collaborated most recently in a professional sense a few years ago when Joe, through his work as the director of Modern Spirit, funded the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD epigenetics trial funded by Modern Spirit that I ran out of my lab here at USC. So the last kind of prefatory remark I want to give just on behalf of myself and the center is that while we tend to have our center events kind of focused on meditation and contemplative practices in a more kind of formal sense, because of the deep overlap, as we will talk about today, between psychedelic therapy and contemplative practices, the similar domains of experience that are opened up, the relevance of contemplative practice to efficiently or effectively engaging with psychedelic therapy. And in this particular case, the relevance of traditional healing practices and the ways in which the domains of experience are somewhat overlapping with the domains of experience to train in through meditative practice. So I really find this to be an area of confluence. And in relationship to that, we are now running a study here. We actually teach the meditation class here, a study, mindfulness-assisted psychedelic therapy research trial, where we're looking at the integration of psychedelic therapy into sustained training in meditation, and comparing and contrasting those people who engage in psilocybin-assisted therapy at our kind of lab across the way on its own versus in the context of meditation training. And so, these are all some of the themes that I may reference in the kind of coming dialogue with Joe. But I want to just really thank you, Joe, for being here. And, to start with, if you have any words you want to start with before doing the singing, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you, everybody that's here, to the Zoom people. However, how many are on Zoom now? Everyone's on Zoom. They're like, looking at Netflix on the side. But you guys are here, 50. So thank you, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here, to be in LA, to be at USC, and to be hosted by Rael. I used to live in Los Angeles, and I have a lot of friends here, and I like being here. I've got a number of people coming from ceremony experience with us, or they're traveling with us, or ketamine, or just from the world of psychedelic, education, integration, talking, therapy, healing, and ceremony. So it's really wonderful to be here with everyone. Yeah, they asked. I guess the idea is to sing a little bit to begin the thing for the medicine song book. And do we keep the lights blaring for that part, or maybe we could bring it down just for a little for the singing part? Maybe that'd be kind of fun for those of us that are here. I was just thinking about this, like, I did an event in Portland and I don't always like sing Icaro at things like this, but for Rael, I am interested in sharing that. And so I was just thinking about, what am I going to sing about? And just, Rael, he's pulling through strong. He just coming over a cold, still pulled off the event. But we were both in Portland last weekend, and his family, his childhood home sold, and all this journey, with his family and his parents. And my childhood home actually just was razed to the ground last weekend. And then our other friend, Kayvon, who's also in Fellowship of the River, that I was with this morning in Redondo Beach, he's about to sell his place here. And there's just all this transition, and everybody's stressed out about so many things going on, with the society, etc. So I'm just going to sing about a little like sadness, grief, cleaning it, washing it a little bit, allowing that to do what it can do, to purge, to clean, to help us wash. So, and it's a kind of a fusion song that's from a little bit of Spanish, still influenced by the plants, and then it goes into the improvised part. But it's also influenced, a lot by there's a lot of influences you can have. But one of them, Rolando Tango, is one of the healers that we used to work with a lot, and I used to sit next to him in ceremony a lot. And I don't know, I always think of him. So this is the new lighting, right? Lágrima de alegría, lágrima de pena, de tristeza, limpian baña baña alma zinda. Ramangaya Hey, Dhamma Kaya Lágrima de alegría, lágrima de pena, de tristeza, limpian baña baña alma zinda. Ramangaya Rao. Nong ong be wam bun ding ding nong ong be wam bun ding ding nong ong be wam bun ding ding mangi ngong mangi 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 nhong ngong mangi 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 nhong mangi ong mangi 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 nhong nande ong yam ming gim ming ging nande yam ming gim ming ging nande ong yam ming gim ming ging nande yam ming gim ming ging nande min di ding nang e nande min di ding nang e yam ming gim ming mai ging ging yam ming gim ming mai ging ging yam ming gim ming mai ging Hangung ong yam nang ging dao hangung yam nang ging ging hangung yam nang ging ging Ming bên nang gan nung dao ming bên nang gan nung dao ngung bên nang gan nung mo
số quang ngũ dùng ông bằng nung đinh hình doài dùng ông bằng nung đinh hình doài dùng trăm bông ông doài dùng trăm bông đâm mong gây yon đau đâm mong gây yon đau đâm mong gây yon đau hang ông mam bung gan ông đau ông gan ông đau ông mam bung gan ông Jin dan nang ung gan nung nang ung jin dan nang ung gan nung nang ung jin dan nang ung gan nung nang gu yong jin bay yin gu yong jin bay yin gu yong bay yin gu yong bay yin we don't may anyway mo we don't may anyway mo we don't may anyway mo bayong yin yin bayong yin bayong yin yin bayong bay yin bên ngang down bên ngang bông ring ngang ring ngang down ring ngang down nung ngung windy jaman now nung ngung windy jaman now bija ging bija ging jo nung ging bija ging bija bay ging jo nung ging jo nung ging jo nung ging Hingi angi mai hin jong, hingi angi mai hin jong. Hingi o angi mai hin jong, hingi angi mai hin jong. Hingi angi mai hin jong. Nên thế ông yên bông dông ông bông nên thế yên bông dông ông money bay you bay hin jong ông you bay hin jong ông you bay hin jong Bingin jong nun jaman now jong nun jaman me mo số ông yong ông bang nung đinh in rồi yong ông bang nung đinh in rồi số anh bay in số anh in ông số anh yong ông bang nung đinh mang bay in jong mang bay in jong mang bay in jong Ni ni min ni zing now hey ni ni min ni zing now hey Many only not my own now many zing not my own ging many zing not my own now many zing not my own ging nung ông jing na bung ni mai ging bung ni mai nung ông gaya nung ông windy gaya nung ông windy boom bay gu yin đau gu yin ai trong nông nhâm mau gu yin ai trong nông nhâm mau điều ông in bên đi gạo 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 hangung jaman angin nang hangung jaman angin ini bana mai jong bana mai jong jaman bana mai jong bana mai jong jaman
Thank you. That's what I want to share a little bit with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So we're coming up on almost 4:30 now. So we got another hour or so to really get into it.
Perfect.
And as a point of reference for those who didn't realize yet, this book, Medicine Song, is kind of the theme around which our discussion today will be circling. And after at 5:30 we'll wrap up, and there's a table out front where Joe has agreed to sit and sign any copies of books if people want that. So just a preview of what will come after, and we also have little refreshments out there to just hang out and get to know each other a bit if you'd like to stick around. So I'm curious whether you have any kind of introductory remarks about the book as a whole you'd like to say.
Yes, thank you. The book is, it's a creative work. I guess I was hoping it would be more creative, and Raul, when I'm always bouncing science ideas off, he's like, Joe, you're more of a storyteller. Don't worry about the academics. But anyways, I still put my ideas forward. And so it's stories. The book was supposed to be about stories and kind of the art of, in my attempt, to weave stories that would touch on certain themes. And the themes of the book are one is, so spiritual healing and the psychedelic renaissance is the subtitle. And it's about, we're here. I'm very blessed to have Gil Carrasco and his wife, one of the lawyers for the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, he's right here. We won. Yes, we won in my mind. We got what we were hoping for, religious exemption to work with ayahuasca in Arizona and beyond, within certain parameters. But it's like my journey from being a teenager to a spiritual path that would end up there, the end of the book. And we saw this walking my mom's neighborhood after we talked to the DEA, this bobcat, and I put it on the back. I don't know if you remember what this big, oh yeah, right? Unforgettable. It was like, oh my God. And so the book is picking stories from my life, from my spiritual path, of when the spirituality in my life or the mystical side of my life was too strong to ignore. And so then it's about that side of life, the mystical side of life. And that's, I was hanging out yesterday in Arizona with some friends of ours, and one of our friends is a surgeon, and now he's become a radiologist. And he's a Native American guy from New Mexico that went to Harvard Medical School from the Pueblo tribe in New Mexico. And he's just like saying how the modern culture is just not nurturing the soul, and that it's there. And so it's this thing about, okay, this side of life, the immaterial, the mystical, you can ignore it, but that doesn't make it go away. And so here we are at the university. And so then that's my story, my journey of like, how do I end up there with the DA, with Gil in my apartment in Arizona? And then when I found out I was at USC last year, we were here, and I announced it at USC, even though I found out while I was at UCLA, naturally. But, So it's that journey and the different things that happened in my life that kind of were just, it was too much for me to say no to that. And so then that's 30 years from high school in the 90s to now. And so then I parallel that to a form. There's different forms of the Eagle and the Condor prophecy. Our spiritual community in Arizona is Church of the Eagle and the Condor. and the Peruvian teachers that informed our community, they have a certain version of the prophecy. It's not, there are different versions. One of the versions is that it's like about North America and South America. The eagle is North America and the South is South America, and we're bringing the Americas together again. So we support that. I do. And then another version is from this like a Incan or pre-Incan or from the Peruvian Andes, that they said is this time of great change. It's all detailed in the book, and I talk about other places. I don't want to drag it out, but they had predicted that there would be this big change from the 1490s to the 1520s, when they're the Condor people in the Andes. My family's from Colombia, and Bogota is in the Andes too, and in the Andean culture, the condor, it's a very sacred. It's the biggest flying bird in the world. And so they're the Condor people, and their culture, they say, is more connected to the spirituality, to the nature, to the community, and also to honor the divine feminine, the sacred Mother Earth, so to speak, etc., among other, masculine deities, but that the mother would be highly regarded and never forgotten, never set aside. And so then the eagle culture in their mind at that time, according to this prophecy, was that that's the Western culture. It's a form. It's not so literal, but it's an idea of, okay, the Western culture coming that was less heart focused, more intellectually focused, and more technological, materialistic, and patriarchal. And so that culture was going to come and clash, and it was be a big clash from the 1490s to the 1520s, and we'll go 500 years. That'd be 500 years of what we're aware of, this clash and the tragedy and the genocide, et cetera, et cetera. And then the 1990s, they said it would be another big time of change. And at that time of change, it would be now the eagle culture, the Western culture, the path of the intellect here at the university would say, oh, we don't know enough. It's not working. Because as they had prophesied, because of disequilibrium in the ecosystem globally and within the mental health landscape, that things would be so far gone that even, in the ivory towers, they would ask advice from, indigenous culture, for like maybe the first time in 500 years. And so then in that time, the Condor people, still grieving their losses, still resentful, the path of the heart, the broken heart, then the broken heart has to open to compassion again, open to forgiveness again, to share. And then the prophecy says now, in this time, 1990s, 2020s, and now we're in the psychedelic 20s. When Ryle and I always bring it up, we were in medical school. Ryle shows up in 1999, tells everybody, I'm going to do research on meditation and psychedelics. And we were at UCSD, and that was come on, man. Like, gee, just shut up. We have to go, just get through this. And he was just we're going to do it. Now it's 2025. He's running psilocybin research with mindfulness here. That was impossible at that time. So it's that time frame. In the Incan, they call it Pachacuti. Pachacuti, Pacha means the earth, like Mother Earth, Pachamama. Kuti is like the turning of the soil, the tilling of the soil. You till it to plant the new seed. Or the turning of the earth. The revolving, the big change. So in the big change now, it's not going to be about the eagle dominating the condor or about the condor dominating the eagle. They have to fly together now. Now they nurture one another. And so that, to me, that's the science and the spirituality. And so then I track in the same thread the journey of the psychedelic Renaissance and the research, which also happens to coincide from the 1990s to now, to where Rick Doblin says now it's the 2000 psychedelic 20s. We're in the psychedelic 20s, and now I was doing research right here, psilocybin, just across, you can walk. We just walk from there. So that's going on. And then that journey of the science is exposing this need to address the spiritual side, the mystical side. The people are going for that kind of healing because it's opening up something that they needed help with to reconnect to. And so then it's about connectedness. It's about helping people reconnect to what is sacred to themselves, to their life, to find hope again, to find meaning again, to find purpose again, to find spiritual relationship with the earth again. That if we don't have that, it's a lot of suffering, So it's not about trying to convince anyone, some idea, some dialogue. It's like, no, what is this? They're coming because they're hurting. The reason psychedelic research is where it is because the pain was so great that the most conservative elements of this says, fine, try it. Go ahead. Give them MDMA, fine. They're dying of cancer. Okay, let them have the psilocybin. They can't look at the pain anymore. They're willing to change their mind because of the pain. So that's what's driving it. So there's something there, there's attraction there, there's a connection there. And so that's trying to find a practical spirituality.
Great intro. I wanted to bring up a point related a little bit to this theme around the 90s to the 20s, the changes that have been going on the last 30 years in biomedicine in particular. The NIH started its office. It was originally called the Office of Alternative Medicine back in the early 90s. Later became the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and later still more recently, the National Center for Integrative Health. And one of the initiatives that they've driven, you may be aware of this, is the idea that spiritual health is actually an important metric for modern biomedicine in the West to take into account. This might not be widely known yet, that's what's going on at the NIH over the last 5 years. And it hasn't actually slowed down in the last year. But I bring that up because of the fact that, I remember, at different points over the years, our collective consternation about, how to even speak about love or spirituality within academic context, within contexts where science has a role to play. And I think it just is part of this reality that enough human beings are noticing the pain within the human family enough to start looking at these domains. We're not alone in that. And the way that the NIH has defined it is spirituality is a search for meaning and purpose that may include a sense of connection to others, self, nature, or higher power. Often characterized by feeling of faith, sense of inner peace, but can certainly extend beyond and separate from religious beliefs. So I just say that to elicit your thoughts on that idea of spirituality as relates to your book.
Yeah, no, thank you, Raul. No, I think it's very important. And so I think that, I was hanging out with these friends of mine yesterday, and she's an occupational therapist. She's Navajo Diné, and then he's this Native American. He's a surgeon, he's Laguna Pueblo, and a radiologist. And so we were having this discussion about religion and that kind of thing, like what you just talked about. And so there's a quote that's very similar to what you just read. So in the book, I parallel them right next to each other, back to this ancestral culture and then the modern science. So that quote, it seems pretty tightly connected to this. This is from this palliative care, the report of the consensus conference. So the palliative care doctors who are on the, staring into the gateways of death while everyone else is trying to figure out if, spirituality matters or whatever, that kind of thing. But they live it every day. In the hospital, people are dying every day, and they're dealing with that all the time. And what that actually is going to mean for each one of us, to really come to terms with, oh, wow, like this is it. And, what does your life mean to you? Because, we're born, we live, and we will die. And so Christina Pachowski is the one that this chaplain told me, Joe, you should include this into your book, because this is kind of a Western, they're MD, she's an MD. Spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Now, similar to what you said. So then, talking to my native friends yesterday, she says, well, this religion, she said, religion, it might be connected, but it might not. And so we understand there's all the religious trauma and it's very triggering and not everyone's comfortable with some of these terms, but we're talking about like quantum physics and, we're talking about the nature of things. That's what this is about. This is the report of the consensus conference of the palliative care doctors. They commit their lives to taking care of people in the most serious times. So that's what they're drawing upon is their experience. And so this is what they find. This is something that exists. And so they said the problem is some of the religious ideas that they're talking about, they're not connected to anything. It's like my friend Travis, it's like they put their cognitive, go into like a cognitive matrix where you tell yourself, oh, this is how everything is, but it's not connected to, like they say, to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. So there's a connectedness to address that's becoming a bigger theme in the psychedelic research world that is also becoming a clinically relevant measure, that connectedness and helping people shift in their connectedness literally to the same, to the self, to the moment, to nature, to the everything is part of how it's going to allow us to understand if they're going to have a positive outcome clinically with their health and well-being. So connectedness is actually directly related to health and well-being. It's not an idea that you get to, carry, hatefully in your heart as you stare into the gates of hell. That's not what it is. That's your idea. So then another perspective, this is Mendahi Bastida, who's a Mexican indigenous wisdom keeper that our old friend Paul Mills introduced me to, that has his own book. So then I put this quote next to that quote. It says, our ancestors tell us how to live in sacred connection. For this, it's important to feel beautifully, and it's necessary to think beautifully, but it's much more significant to connect beautifully. Through that kind of connection, you remember who you are, you know who you are, and you celebrate who you are. You are stardust, you are the balanced combination of the sacred elements. You are the meeting point of the four directions and the dewdrop and the fine thread of the web of life. So to me, I see that's where it comes together again. And then it shouldn't be something that is in conflict, because it's the ego and the condors. There's no conflict with science. We're saying it should be totally connected. Yeah.
Idea that spirituality can come to have, be. There are still plenty of people, maybe people in this room. I won't ask you to raise your hands, so we don't have to do that exercise. But who have a little bit of a feeling of like maybe I'm about to throw up to even hear the word spirituality. The idea is just too indistinct, just like it's some bubble gum. For some people, they hear it that way, right? But but I think it's useful to talk about it in the way that you are talking about it in this book. And I just would say, similarly, there was a time when, meditation was just this kind of abstract notion that was, kind of meaningless to even talk about, because what's that got to do with me? And we came to have an understanding, well, we're speaking about a quality of awareness, the quality of the present moment, attentional processing of our lives in a very specific way, being aware and accepting and aware. And similarly with spirituality, it seems like, and I'm curious if you have an elaboration or maybe a thought that there's more to say, but to kind of really reduce it down to the essence, there's something about meaning and connection, it seems to me.
This is definitely part of it, and so then it's also for us, or for me, it's so important that it can be all those things, and so yes, we have to be compassionate to the people that are traumatized by experiences that are traumatic, but to reduce it down to the essence, like that's at some point very personal, and so meaning or connection but for we honor that. That's a personal thing. So because it's like you said, through the awareness, so we celebrate the awareness of the being. The awareness of the being is one of our windows into what it is. So we want to hear from another living being, to hear how they experience it. And they're going to teach us what that is. And so that's an important part of this new, and from the ancestral culture, is that these things that are mysterious and to some degree intuited, that it's through dialogue and consensus. So it's not about, and the reductionist, it's always like, okay, this is it, this is it. But it's never that only. It's useful. We want something useful, and it's important to bring those things forward. But it's kind of like, I was telling somebody the other day, they're trying to find the right, the optimize it just right. Oh, the perfect optimize, blah, blah, blah. I said, if it was so simple, then I guess to raise a child, you just you just said the right thing. But it's that is a living being. Okay, everybody knows that. So it's just we have to kind of open our mind a little bit and say, okay, maybe it's not as simple as that. And still, we want to find something that's going to be loving, that's going to be nurturing, that's going to support. And it allows for a diversity of ideas, and it allows for the uniqueness of each person's spiritual gifts to be the one that shines the light on what it is. Just the same way I see a bird and, oh, it's so beautiful. Look at that bird. Wow, it's so beautiful. And that bird is helping us come into that awe. But it's not because that bird had a meeting with other birds and agreed that we're going to fly this way, because then that'll, that gets them going. It's because that bird is flying how that bird flies, in its deepest essence and its deepest connectedness. But I think there's a uniqueness that I want to just bring forward.
Yeah. Thank you. David Vago, whose name you may remember, was organizing that panel at the International Society for Contemplative Research. He's up in Vancouver, BC area, so he's not here in person, but he did want to bring a question to you right here. Thank you for the beautiful singing. In your clinical work with psychedelic assisted healing, how do you understand the role of ritual, cultural lineage, and communal practices in shaping therapeutic outcomes? And then specifically, what elements of ritual, the music, the ceremony, the intention setting, ancestral framework, healer participant dynamics appear to meaningfully influence emotional processing, safety, integration?
So we've been trying to, and I write about it in the book, there's a couple, during the lawsuit with the government, I started to pull back from the ceremony and tone it down. And as a doctor, I'm a doctor after all, decided to drift back to the medical practice, and the opportunity was ketamine. And I was invited to, because of my work with plant medicine and ceremony, then I was invited to be on the board of a PRATI, Psychedelic Research and Training Institute in Colorado. Scott Shannon wrote the foreword to the book. He's one of the founders of PRATI. And so they invite you to, he's like, Joe, if you come on the board, they want to make their board more interesting, diversify the board. So I get to be on the board. And I'm happy to be on the board. And he's from Arizona, and it's nice to share the experience. And I got to meet a lot of neat people that were there. So it was a big opportunity for me. And then they said, if you join the board, you get to come to the ketamine training for free. Like, you're a board member. I was like, okay. I don't know if the other board member, I'm going to go. So I went, and they had it's in Colorado, and it's an educational program, but it's with ketamine. And then they bring a degree of ceremony to what they're doing. It's in nature. They go into a really beautiful natural place. So the first ceremony is how they relate to the land, where they do it at, the set and setting, but the setting is deeper, How much do they love the land where they're doing it at? And if you love it that much, then, how much do you get back from that? Investing in that. So that's part of what they do. And then they had some kind of, open spirituality that they did, or some kind of ritual to kind of open the energetics of it, and then go through it. And it was a very interesting experience. And my experience with ketamine was, I had a deep experience for sure. But it felt, in a way, you would hear some people say afterwards, like, some people had beautiful things. They talked to a deceased loved one that happened to somebody there. And then somebody else was like, whoa, that was like amoral. That was like, it was beyond any rules, or, it's just, it's so open that it's no holds barred. Like, there's no direction. It's, nihilistic almost. You could, go into that direction with it, that there's no meaning, there's no purpose. Like, everything is nothing and nothing. And then, the chaos to become something that would feel meaningless to someone. And I said, yeah, I could see where they're talking about. For me, that there was, like, with ayahuasca or mushrooms, that there's kind of there's a guiding force connected to nature that's kind of helping. Not that I would say, I still work with ketamine. I'm not saying ketamine is so far from the natural world. I don't agree with that. But I was like, oh, there's a big opening here. And so I thought to myself, in my experience with ayahuasca and plant medicine ceremony, that you could bring spiritual structure to it to help create the structure that was making people feel too open, too empty, too lost. So you bring the spiritual structure. So then that is something, again, like my angle and my message is, like, it really depends on the people, on the location, so it's nothing standardized. Like, the culture is not standardized. I mean, I guess it gets standardized, but the origin of culture is not like that. The Icaro in my teacher's tradition, everybody sings different. You're not trying to sing like your teacher. You're trying to sing your medicine. And they're trying to help you find that. And so then they even have different ayahuasca. They do ayahuasca like this here, and they do ayahuasca like this over here, and they do ayahuasca like that over there. And that's so common, just like in all over the place. The localities where the land and the relationship with the people and the community evolves into something in its connectedness that has a spirit. So then we say, okay, well, we're in Arizona, and we've been building these bridges to traditional people, ancestral here in the Americas. Each Eagle and the Condor says, for our community, say, we would like to see, we understand there's a lack of opportunity, but we would like to see much more interest in the ancestral culture of this land. From, in the idea that that there's people praying for, 1,000 years. So to come back into alignment with that prayer, just like it is somewhere else, where it's not so broken, and the ancestrality of the culture. So for us, we're interested in that. So we have our opportunity, but the opportunity is not an idea. It's not a concept. It's a person. So we have Josie Bagay James, Navajo medicine woman. We have Ruturi Tamai. He's Huichol, Widarika tribe. He owns a property that we found out about. We met him at a conference. Said, hey, can we do it at your place? And then you can guide us with your medicine. And then Josie's going to bring her medicine. And then I'm going to bring my medicine. And I'm going to bring these other people that work at the ketamine clinic. It's a nurse practitioner who has such a beautiful energy and a beautiful love. That's very special. I don't know how to describe it, but it's from a career in nursing and a beautiful heart. And she can hold people in ways that, you can train shamanism your whole life. You may not learn how to do that. Other people like that too. So we bring those people together. And then I said, well, and then, something that I think will eventually happen in this culture, may take a long time, hundreds of years, I don't know how long, but around the medicines, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin, it's only natural that the live singing will come back to it and the live music would come back to it, because that's what's happened everywhere else in the world. Obviously, it developed before electricity in most of those places, but still, the art of that and the gift of that there are people with the gift of ceremonial singing. And the editor of the book, for example, Caroline Pincus, my trusty editor, she lives in the Bay Area and she sings with a threshold choir. Threshold choir, those trios that sing to people when they're dying. So that we relate on that. Because that's a very real thing that I would say, to me, that's, I don't know, shamanic, those words, again, they fall out of favor. It's like energetically conscious. So for us, that's the beauty of the live singing and the ketamine. And it's not that everybody should do that. There's amazing, East Forest is developing this stuff. All these people are trying to develop new kinds of music they're going to support, but adding more dimensions to it. So for us, the spirituality is bringing these other dimensions to it that involve honoring the gifts of the people who we are and who we have, and in the spirit of love and healing and respect. And we draw on the culture for the experience. So now we can do ketamine with a group of people, and then we healthcare providers, and we can have Ruturi, who's been in peyote ceremony his whole life, and Josie, who's been in peyote ceremony and just traditional Navajo ceremony forever. It'd be great to have any kind of spiritually experienced person there. Threshold choir singer. But okay, you hear this, you hear what just happened to these people. Do you have any guidance? What should we do? Have you seen this before? She has her hand up. Should we go in the crowd?
Sure.
Over here?
So that people on Zoom can hear you too.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off at all, but I'm so curious about this conversation about culture, because I think there's so much about, just speaking of Western culture or speaking about modern culture with the lack of the village, a lack of community that's, more separative, isolating, building these houses. We don't know our neighbors. There's the work, the jobs, the things that take us away from our family, and, just every single little part of it. To
Phoenix, Arizona. I'm from there.
Yeah. I mean, so many places. So then to go into, these other, in the Dieta world, in the shamanic, or, these tribes where there is that built-in, it's such a different experience. And I know people who've done psychedelics, they might feel that sense of unity, that oneness, that community, that, brotherhood, sisterhood. And then they go back, and there's why there's this big talk about integration, because it's so hard to even fit back into all the stress and the demand and the rushing and the, you got to do it right now. And, there's so much about it that is not, kind of centered for healing and well-being and health. I think they discovered in whenever, that unhappy people buy more stuff. So the society and the culture is not, really aiming towards that. It's aiming for something else. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, I guess, in the sense of like that bird's eye view of, you know, the eagle and the condor, and like what is the future for with these medicines coming into the culture and more people being aware now and seeing, you know, the way that the systems were designed not being for our best, highest good, you know? Yeah.
Now, that was the topic of yesterday, like hanging out with the people. And I think, you know, and I suffer in Phoenix because I think it's as being kind of a more modern, developed city, that it's really in that culture, like you said, that it's creating an infrastructure that is, and so then, you know, I think one of the ideas of the book is like from the science side and trying to learn. So the idea is that the hope is that we don't have to turn our back on any part of the experience. We're going to learn from the whole thing. And the other thing is that we don't know. So Phoenix is a place to me, and here there's plenty of environments like that where the momentum and the infrastructure has gone to such a direction that I can't help but feel they would just have to be torn down for it to ever become anything healthy culturally. Like I don't know. I mean, that's my instinct. Like I don't want to, I'm not trying to condemn, but just that the reaction is that it's like, oh my God, like it just create, like you said, like unhealthy, unhappy, buy more stuff. And then the answer is, well, let's sell stuff, because that's what's going on. So if we can just ride that wave, sell the stuff, and then everybody's unhappy, whatever, just sell more stuff and that direction. And so then the idea is that, that's this ego culture that, America being the leading edge of materialism. Like this is the number one. Like where material has been given that full God status. I mean, full God status. Like we're all very aware. And so when we've allowed it, it's gone that far. And so now the materialism is so now in that presumed divinity, that's God. Being Colombian American, you go home to Colombia to your family, say, hey, don't you want to come to America? They're like, you know how they are. It's like the career, it just consumes their whole life. Like, they only care about one thing, money. And so you come back and you're like, ooh, and not that there isn't some amazing things. And a lot of people want to come here and there's incredible things here and it's beautiful things, but that particular, like where it swung that far to where building these things, this is like that the children are doing more poorly. The culture ideally evolves to raise the children. That's the point of the culture. That's what it is. It's not just to sell more stuff. Like that is what it has become. But la cultura, like in the conscious embodiment, is you're trying to create a system that will breed health and thriving. That's what it means, to be cultivated. And so as we try to swing back in a place like, I opened the book talking about working at a ketamine clinic in Phoenix. And somebody comes and says like, I don't know, like something's missing. I don't know what it is. I think it might be spiritual. I heard you guys can help me find that. And so then my idea, all I have is let's just start helping them one by one. Help them one by one to understand maybe a little bit more about what they're missing. And then it's up to them to build it this other way. Because we're not going to turn it on a dime. I'd be going to the jungle, living in the jungle, a lot of trouble, but some beautiful joy, some thriving vibrancy. Come back to Phoenix, go with my mom. I'm at Costco. Like, Mom, look at this. Everybody's sick, How this isn't good for anything. I was like, Joe, it's not going to turn on a dime, So somehow we got here and we see, yeah, that's a big problem. And so then my thing is like for the guidance that we're looking for, I say, let's go to the Western. For the guidance, then I want to see the dimensions of measurable, like, okay, how's the psychological health? If you have this kind of neighborhood, built this kind of way, what's the rate of anxiety? What's the rate of depression? How much psychiatric medication does it take to live there? You know? What's it costing the healthcare system to do that? And then now the physical health. That's easy. We can all agree on that one. You know, how's the physical health doing? How's the emotional health? So now there's measures around emotional health, but there's also measures around emotional biology and emotional physiology and nervous system regulation. How's the nervous system regulation going over there? How triggered are the people? How ready are they to kill somebody over disagreeing with some little idea? You know, or because somebody bumped into their kid. Like that's not well. I mean, it's fair to say. Like there's at the hospital, you would say that's not well. So then also their spiritual well-being. So now there's these measures that are coming into the clinical setting around the psychedelic research about shifting spiritual well-being. So this personal meaning, there's measures. So let's use that. And then this connectedness scale. How healthy are their relationships? So my thing is we should move the focus back towards the health. And so it's like, okay, you're ambitious, you want to make money, that's good, let's do that. But if it's like so unhealthy, and then that's why I talk about greed rot in the book. My concept, greed rot, is like when greed becomes pathological. And as a pathology, meaning it's an addiction. Because, okay, we'll sell more stuff, we'll just sell more stuff, or we'll just sell more stuff. Maybe if we sell a watch, maybe if we sell some sneakers, maybe if we sell these cards. If I sell this, just like selling all this stuff to try to like get their little dopamine, I guess. And so then when you see it like that, when you see that it's this greed rot, as I call it, then it's like as a doctor, it's like alcohol. When it becomes a problem, there's a criteria. That person, they drink beer, they drink wine, they're okay. But that person over here, they start getting into trouble with their job, with their family, with the law. There's a set criteria. When you can say, and when you hit that criteria, you could say, that's an emotional disturbance. That's unresolved trauma or some other issue. That's what we're looking at. It's not this God to revere, that unbridled greed. That's illness. So if we're really serious about health and wellness and we put the attention there, that's where we have to put the attention. Because that's universal. We now, if there's different culture, there's different perspectives, there's different ideas. But, the psychological measures people are agreeing across the different societies. Anxiety, trauma, depression. So how are you doing with that stuff? That's the measure. That's a value that's priceless, as they say. When your child has these kind of problems, that's no money is going to fix that for you.
Another friend of ours is chiming in, Stacy Gomes.
Wonderful.
How do you see the role of psychedelics in the development of consciousness, given the growing spiritual bypassing we currently see?
Yeah, so then we have this connectedness and we have this new scale. And so similarly, just like in the shamanic world or the sacred plant medicine world or the spiritual world, we use the same scale. So are you bypassing? So you can tell me that you drank ayahuasca and you had talked to all the spirits and they told you all the answers to everything. But how are you doing in your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual well-being, and your relationships? So it's connected, it's grounded. So then just spiritual bypassing, where those things are not being addressed, is you could call it a form of, fanaticism. It's like, okay, you're a fanatic. You've kind of, it's a matrix to put your mind to. but you're not dealing with these other dimensions that we're saying are real.
It seems to me that spiritual bypassing oftentimes refers to people who are having a real challenge to get in touch with their true emotional life. And what they're bypassing primarily is contact with some negative emotion that that they just don't have a way into experience, right? And I say that also because I know we've had these discussions over the years. There's some interesting tendencies. Even people along the meditative path can sometimes, be practicing in such a way where the mind is just too strong and the emotional body is too weak, within that person's psychology, their childhood conditioning, et cetera, such that they're practicing these long hours of kind of non-judgmental, equanimous awareness, watching, the internal events pass moment to moment, hour after hour, but still not contacting that emotional core. And so I just think it could be an opportunity to talk about that. I do think that there are real strengths that the meditative disciplines have to offer in the process of deep healing, and there are also strengths that psychedelics has, and it seems to me that psychedelics do have an opportunity. They offer an opportunity to get in touch with that which is long kind of these coverings over our heart or emotional body, that finally we can actually contact them through the power of these substances.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that in a related way, like just like with a spiritual bypass, like you said, that it's like a complex that's allowing someone to avoid or maybe keep a safe distance or what they feel from this negative emotion. I would put the hyper materialism in the same category, like here at the scientific university. So you have the same kind of thing. And I think it's a nice example to go. It's like, okay, you create a model where you don't have to go there, where it's like, oh, that's not real. Emotion's not real. I mean, the other person said their story of like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm in the bliss. I don't need to feel that. I didn't have a bad day. I like everything, and so similarly, I think the science, the hyper materialistic science, is also an avoidance. And so I think it's important, and it's easy to be judgmental and to say, but I mean, where I hope to, and I don't always achieve it, but what I want to get to is that compassion. Like when you see somebody spiritually bypassing, when you acknowledge, wow, they've got some hard emotions that it's hard for them to get close to. So you know what that is. And so for me, when they tell me, oh, what are you going to do at the university when they start coming with a rigid science? It's like, I know that's what it is. It's like, it's a broken-hearted person talking to me that can't go there, and that's why it's so uncomfortable to get into this emotional. So then there's this piece of that and this is what the ancestral tradition can potentially, and it's full of, problems too, but one concept that I try to bring forward into the ketamine retreats is like, okay, what are we trying to do? What is ceremony? Like for ceremony, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to create a safe environment so that it's like truly safe, that it's safe by all measures, and that it's a safe place to be vulnerable. The reality is like these are very vulnerable, like you said, this negative emotions, this big trauma, these big insecurities that we carry. And so it's like so vulnerable. And then like we use the spiritual practice, the contemplation, the other practices to transcend judgment so that we can hold that in a non-judgmental way. And so then for the spiritual bypasser, that was what we hope. We hope to be able to say, oh, wow, this person, maybe they haven't been held in enough safety to be vulnerable enough without judgment. to go there and to process out whatever that is that's like too much, like you said. Same way with the hardcore scientist. You know, I can tell, and I say it because at Niue Rao in Peru, we had it. I saw it many times, you know, where somebody would come, where they're the head of the surgery department from this medical school, and so closed, you know, so they don't want to talk. Oh, don't talk to me about the woo woo. And then if you hold them in the safety, you know, where they can be vulnerable, and don't judge them. And that's why I say the nature is such an important influence. And we have the beauty of that in the jungle. It's easy because it's all around us. I say that the nature teaches us how to be a loving community because it holds you in your vulnerability without judgment, you know? And so then you can be whatever you need to be. So then we use that example, and the Shipibo tradition learn from the plants how to hold that space for someone, but realize that we don't have to make it up. It's the nature is here to show us that that's part of this realm. And so to me, those are some important points to express around that. And I think Stacy, you know, it's really important. And so then when they, you know, I think that's hopefully as we gain experience with these substances in the community and the culture, then we'll mature. But as a simple point, like, you know, I work with my friend Sochi Bukuru in Colombia for indigenous tradition, ancestral wisdom, ayahuasca, forever, you know, as far as we know, past what anyone knows or remembers. So you don't have to tell them, you know, like, oh, I came on the weekend and now I know. And it's like, no, they're telling you like how it turns out. So they say, if this is making you feel more special than everybody else, or you're the one that has it's like, it's not working. This should make you feel more integral to the whole. That's integrity.
There's a couple more questions. And then after yours, you can pass it right behind you.
You mentioned the role of, when you were describing the eagle and the condor, the presence of respect for women. And you mentioned a couple of times too, the role and responsibility we have to raise the next generation. And I wonder, how does the role of mothers fit into the preservation of culture, the passing along of understanding, the entraining of philosophies and things, so that there can be epigenetic change? We're not doing this for us, we're doing it for them. What have you observed in your work around the role of mothers and children in, your practice?
Well, I think that it's crucial, you know, so the mother's role in culture is extremely important. You know, like, come on, it's so important. And so then we see, you know, and then this thing about the masculine and the feminine. And so then that's what they also say, like with the eagle and the condor, for whatever it's worth, in this rebalancing, this reharmonizing. So the idea is, okay, you could swing one way. Okay, now we're going to go all the way the other way, or they're going to nurture each other. They're going to respect each other. They're going to nurture each other. But of course, there has to be a major rebalancing. So we're kind of experiencing that right now, to me, you know, on a national scale. It's like, here's what, without getting overly political, but just something just to observe is, these are these guys like doing whatever they want as long as their mom can't see them, do whatever it is they're doing. And that's the culture they want to live in. Is that, oh, their mom can't see it, their daughter can't see it, their sister can't see it. And so they're on their own getting lost without that presence, getting lost. Like by the time you shake, whoa, what? I did what? You caught me doing what? You know, to who? And so it's like, so then as that's happening with the eagle and the condor, we see in this rise of the feminine, this struggle to bring more rights to feminine perspective, feminine authority, feminine authority, then at least in the political scene, for whatever it's worth, in this last period, we see more females in the Congress than ever before. That's the reality. There's never been so many mothers in the governing body. So now you're not getting away with it anymore because it's in front of the moms what you're doing. And so it's shifting the response. And so it's just like, is that relationship and that presence and that respect to have for whatever it's worth. There's just a funny little thing that I watched one time with the Marvel movies, and they were showing, that they were giving, it was an interesting example. They said, look at this Wonder Woman, that in that world, like she's the lone woman going out into the world of men and the war and all that stuff. And, she's fighting all the misogyny. And then like in the more like ancestral, the Black Panther, all the females are right up front. His mom, the sister, the whatever, you got to deal with them. And so that idea of like the family is from that. Everybody has to deal with their mother and their father. And so it's so important to honor the feminine again, because that's where we see how far it's gotten, lost, out of touch with that. So they say, the indigenous, the sacred mother, that it's like, okay, I'm grow Catholic, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, maybe it's ambiguous, but then, okay, Mother Mary in our Colombian is always there, very prominent, always, but still, it's like there's this effort to bring that forward. But we say, if you don't have that, you're going to get lost.
Thank you.
Joe, I and others use the definition of science as the way humans organize our knowledge to uncover the hidden potential of nature. And nowhere in that definition is the framework of Western medicine, meaning, yes, Rael and I are MD, PhDs. So we've blurred our PhD scientists into the framework of Western medicine. And I'm curious if you, in your travels or your journey, if you could uncouple science from the house of Western allopathic medicine. Is there room for a scientific approach through a different framework, through a different lens? So could scientists meet your church to understand how to bring that hidden potential through a scientific lens out to the world, aside from the house of Western medicine?
Yes, I believe so. And so the traditional like ancestral culture, for example, the Hindu, the Ayurvedic, they consider themselves scientists. The Shipibo Ayahuasquero considers himself a scientist. Like, the definition you just described, like trying to uncover the hidden potential of life. That's what it is. That's what curanderismo, the Shipibo word for the ayahuasquero, onanya. It means uni is ayahuasca, but uni also means wisdom. So they're studying the wisdom of the plants to try to unlock the potential. So then the potential one of the interesting, exciting parts of the potential is it can demonstrate itself in healing. So we unlock the potential, and then we can open a healing that we didn't know was possible, because somehow the potential was too constrained, restricted somehow. And then we reopen a potential like this neuroplasticity or something like that to open the possibilities, to open us to the realm of possibilities. So the science is saying that, from what I understand with the quantum physics and all the physics, theoretical physics, for example, this 0-point field, that there's this measurable energetic field that could potentially be the source of consciousness or related to, or that we couple our consciousness with that energy to be conscious. And so that to me is science. But then I just don't, the difference is like medicine, science isn't always medicine, you know, because science, they're just studying to study sometimes. And so they'll argue, you know, that it's so important what they're doing sometimes, but they forget about the healing. So we say that the healing is a really important guide, that you could maybe go way over here, and sometimes it's important, but sometimes it's not. So the medicine for us is a big guide. And so that's like kind of where the consciousness meets the life. The healing the therapeutic potential is a very interesting element there. So for a lot of the traditional people, they feel like the spirituality and the health are the same thing. And it's about getting into this connectedness of this potential that's underneath, that we're trying to uncover. So we see it that way. The other medicine, Western medicine, or the parts where we get a little, you know, when people get the momentum of rigidity around ideas, you know, sometimes because of money, from capitalist ideas, or stubbornness, or this brokenheartedness, you know, that they're going down these paths and sticking to their guns in some kind of rigid, you know, fashion, but they're blocking the potential. So I don't know if I'm really addressing what you're talking about, but I just don't, science never has to be far from that. In medicine, it's just in a continuum. And that's the part that I have a hard time like understanding with the Western culture, because people say always like, oh, I put on my, you know, scientist hat, and now I have my MD hat on, or now I put on my, you know, Burning Man hat, whatever, you know. And I'm just like, it's just your natural consciousness that we're trying to open. And so, and then when I feel like when we compartmentalize, and I compartmentalize myself, and we have our different parts and all that kind of stuff, but in trying to be more loving to ourselves, more tender to ourselves, when I hear people say, oh, I put on my scientist hat and it makes sense, but then I go back and I have to go to my work and my job and the thing, and it doesn't make sense anymore. And I'm like, okay, well, to me, it's like this part of you accepts that you are sacred, and this other part of you says you're not. And I don't know. I think maybe you are. And it doesn't have to be one way or the other. And I think that's, the heart is not as compartmentalized as those ideas of like, oh, this is this and this is that. And if I say this, and now how can I get away with this? Oh no, how could you say that in the halls of medicine? How could you say that in the halls of science? And it's like, well, what are you talking about? You know, you're going to leave here. You're going to go home to cry over some family problem like every other person, you know? Just like, where's the humanity and what they're talking about?
I have a somewhat related last question I wanted to pose to you, which is related to this. There's an interesting synchronicity between the two of us in regards to having some kind of a visionary type experience related to the notion of entropy in the brain and consciousness. And so my little snippet was back around when we first met. This was around 2000, 2001. And, you know, I had some very deep mystical spiritual experiences that, you know, convinced me that what was important in life was to somehow find a way to bring science and spirit together as a way of giving humanity a chance to survive this age we're in. And then I'm at med school, and I'd spent, you know, after some of those early experiences where my mind was quite wide open, I spent many years just studying like a maniac in order to, you know, be in the MD PhD program I was in. So I'd really studied a lot of neuroscience and molecular biology, et cetera, for some years at this point. But I was starting to let my mind, you know, kind of open up to like the future that I really wanted to study, which was really, you know, the awakening, opening of consciousness in this more universal sense that I still consider to be our kind of native human birthright. And this was in the aftermath of like having had a mushroom experience a few days before, and then just thinking about what was going on in my brain that underlie that capacity to recognize that sense that there's no separation, that not just a kind of meta awareness and mindfulness and presence, but also kind of merging with the sense like the self, the non-self, the observer, the observed. And I was thinking through all these different, neural circuits that I had learned up to that point. And then something just came to me of the nature that consciousness doesn't come from the brain anyway. Who knows if that's right? That was just the intuitive hit that I had. And so maybe it's really about just scrambling the brain somehow, that's what these substances are doing. And when the brain is scrambled, then you experience the fundamental nature of consciousness. And it just seems so right. And, for many years, there was no experimental evidence to suggest that might be correct. In fact, I went to the one lab at the time in the early 2000s that was studying that, and we didn't apply the measures of looking at entropy and circuitry to see that there's a relationship there. But it turns out, as you know, in the early 2010s, Robin Carhart-Harris and colleagues did find this relationship between the entropy of the brain and the effect of psychedelics that then it turned out was also observed when looking at the brain of meditation versus, a thinking state. And then you had your experience, which I'd like you to kind of expand upon with regards, in the book you write about the experience of an intuitive knowing around this entropy in the brain and some visionary experience. And can you take it from there?
Yeah. So there, and here we are, and Raoul's at the forefront of this, and a lot of people here are at the forefront of this, of starting to look at like networks, brain networks. And this idea of brain networks, Robin Carhart-Harris, when he's talking about the default mode network, I mean, they put that forth, like, is this the neural correlate of the ego? Because this is their network that when we shut it, we can watch it shut down, or the connectivity goes down enough on the functional MRI, and we can see they report that their ego dissolved. And then they come into this state that Raoul's talking about in some cases, where they feel this primary consciousness, so to speak, this access to something that their conditioned networks was preventing them from experiencing. And this idea of like collapsing the networks so that, like you said, you could potentially open yourself to something that other people, like through spiritual practice, like meditation, that's similarly showing over long-term, right? You're the expert of this, that connectivity of that particular network is reduced in a way that's similar to what people are achieving in a shorter term with the psychedelics. So when I did my first ketamine thing I had a dyad partner, and he wasn't really doing a lot to him, and they gave him more, they gave him the booster, and he's like, well, this is like day 3 of Vipassana. Like if I meditate for 3 days and I'm here, and so it's the same idea. Like, okay, so then now, and then we hear about people having mystical experiences at these meditation retreats, that they're priming themselves to open themselves to receive, something more. And that the spiritual practice that's part of it, is that there is this form of mystical portal that we're trying to potentially open in a useful way. That it could also be dangerous, that it could also be messy, that it could also be chaotic, that could put people into destabilized states, and opening the doors to Pandora's box, to the chaos that the ego and these networks are constraining and constricting, sometimes to ground us. Sometimes the human mind has a potential, to get lost in the madness, and it needs to be prepared and trained in order to get to these other bardos, or however the monks, these Buddhists and different people that prepare themselves to try to, that it's not just so simple, that you don't just throw open the doors and everybody's ready. So in the book, that's the book I talk about, visions and dreams, because that's and I get into it there with one of the indigenous teachers from Colombia saying, it's not just, it's visions and dreams. And so in the chapter that I talk about opening up visions, big in ayahuasca from a lot of training and having a big ceremony that I wouldn't recommend, but even in the tradition, they say somebody has to train to be able to go through that in a peaceful way. That could be so problematic. But so that's the whole set and setting, we know all about that, set and setting, trying to hold people in such a way and ease them in to a bigger and bigger exposure to that. And within that, there's still so much room to project and fool yourself. And I was watching Netflix, The Blood of Zeus. I don't know if you saw Blood of Zeus, but it was a fun cartoon of the Greek myths. And they send the different, Morpheus and the gods send. There's 3 that they send to the dreams. One of them is like phantasmagoria. It's like just one of it's like fantasy. The other one is showing them like fear and nightmares. And the other one is revealing truth. So there's still a discernment that has to be, there. If we're going to open, we have to say, you have to discern. It's not simple enough to, I did it. I took a heroic dose and now I saw God. It's like there's something more to that. But in my experience, so then it was the dieta and the Shipibo style for a month, having some big ayahuascas, but then it was my dreams. So I was having these dreams that were waking me up to tell me things. And so that was the thing, is they were showing me the brain entropy. We were having a discussion about the neuroscience and the networks collapsing and opening up the brain, the less restrained brain activity, the less predictable brain activity, closer to, I would say, the realm of possibilities. And so that they said that, it's a potential portal. When you do that, you might just project and fool yourself and bypass and do all that stuff. But it's also the possibility that you would open yourself to metaphysical resource.
They, in this case, are some entities in your dreams.
And that's a mystery. So you can, like I said, they just like focus on that and trip over that and tell you, and did I see the DMT elves? Are they real? And just talk about that. And you're right and I'm wrong. And you're right and I'm wrong. And then they say, like, well, his question was, how can the scientists, come into this? And so I would just say this, like, it's the human consciousness, back to how I started, as like shining the light. And so that's how it was for me. And so that's why I'm saying it, but I'm not saying that's how it is. So for me, I would say that's how I talk about it.
I think it's very valuable to talk about it that way, because we don't have enough talk.
So we say, for us, we say, las plantas. Why do I say it? Because I'm dieting the plants. They're telling me that if you diet the plants like this, the spirits might talk to you. So then when the spirits are talking to me in my dreams and I'm in that setting, then that's my functional way of working with, say, the plants, open this to me. And they said, if you have the portals open in the high entropy state, you have a chance to receive metaphysical resource. And so that's why Sochi Bukuru says, healing is a state of receptivity. So the idea is that there's an energy, there's a field, there's something. How come sometimes you start healing and rejuvenating and other times you don't? What is that when you tap into the prana, or you tap into, how does a rock star get the whole crowd to be like, whoa, what are they doing? So for us, we say that's that spiritual side of life that inspires. And so thank you for, I like to talk about it that way, because but when we talk about it that way, We're not preaching to anybody. We're sharing, you know?
Sharing your experience.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm aware we've gone a little over our time, but as I've mentioned, Joe's going to be around for a little while signing books. So there's time, to kind of hang around out in the lobby and get a book if you like, talk some more. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raul.
Thank you, Joe.